It's time once again for the annual Digital Foundry Game of the Year Awards. Hard to believe that yet another year has passed us by, but 2021 was a pretty good year for video games. Last generation machines have matured, while the latest generation of consoles have now enjoyed one full year in the market, so there's a lot of games to choose from. As is tradition then, each member of the Digital Foundry team, at least those who wish to participate anyways, puts together a list of their favorite games of the respective year and presents them in video form. That's exactly what I'm doing today, but as always, it's important to keep in mind that we couldn't possibly play everything, so the games on this list specifically represent our personal favorites out of those. The number of games on each list will also vary from person to person, so keep that in mind. For my list, I've selected 8 games to present in this video. I would have liked to have done 10, but due to time constraints, we're limited to 8. I'll maybe reveal number 9 and number 10 at the very end of this video, but for now, let's dive into that list, starting with number 8. One of my favorite trends of the last few years is the stream of new games created for classic consoles, such as the Sega Mega Drive. But of course, there's no guarantee that this approach will actually yield a great game. Thankfully, much like last year's excellent Xenocrisis, Demons of Astaborg is a huge success. The small French team behind this game has managed to deliver something that feels both modern and retro at the same time, and it does so with a hefty coat of polish. The developers describe this as a platform-based game with some Metroidvania elements, but what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it turns out this description is pretty apt. The game plays out in a linear fashion, moving stage to stage, like a classic platformer such as Castlevania or Ghouls and Ghosts, but within each stage, you'll gain access to a unique power-up or ability that becomes essential for completing that stage. This power-up is only retained until you complete the stage, which is exactly what allows the stage design to shine, as it means that each level can feature its own unique challenges centered around that specific power-up. In one case, you gain a fire attack. It can be used to open doors or attack enemies, of course, but it can also be used to light arrows on fire, opening specific locked doors in the process, or to light a blaze and attack from an otherwise invincible boss. Or later on, a power-up can briefly stop time, allowing you to cross falling objects or take on a quick foe. Every stage has its own idea, and they're all very well implemented and fun to use. In a way, it feels like this perfect harmony between classic stage-driven Castlevania games and something like Castlevania Symphony of the Night in terms of design. I'm kind of amazed that it works as well as it does. The level layouts, core action mechanics, and general feel of the game are also top-notch. Plus, it looks fantastic for a new Mega Drive game with huge, expressive, well-animated sprites and rich parallax backgrounds. There's other fancy tricks as well, like this pseudo 3D background that was similar to the one featured in Ranger X, but at 60 frames per second, or this tower climb similar to Mickey Mania. When you combine all of these things together, it winds up becoming one of the more impressive games I've played on the Mega Drive. In addition, it features a superb soundtrack, which takes great advantage of the Mega Drive's unique sound system. So yeah, Demons of Astaborg really impressed me. It's a phenomenal action game that is elevated by its choice of platform. I enjoyed playing it from an original cart too, on a real Mega Drive, but of course, it's also available digitally on other platforms if you prefer. Either way, it's definitely worth a look. Standing out in the retro-styled platforming space is not easy. Even if a game nails the aesthetic, there's no guarantee it will deliver where it really counts. Cyber Shadow, though, is one of those exceptions. It's a game where the developer demonstrates their firm understanding of the genre with style and confidence. There's no twist here, no unnecessary gimmicks. Cyber Shadow is just refined action from start to finish. So what precisely makes this one special then? Well, in my eyes, the best action platformer games must satisfy several key criteria. Firstly, you need polished core gameplay mechanics. This includes everything from the run cycle to jumping and slashing your foes. You'll perform these actions hundreds of times over the course of the game, and they need to be refined to a mirror-like sheen. Secondly, you need a killer soundtrack. It may seem tangential to the gameplay itself, but I assure you, it is not. The music driving the action is key in keeping the player moving, even through difficult sequences. As you refine your skills, the right music track can truly elevate the moment. Thirdly, the game should offer a strong visual aesthetic that leverages the selected inspirations, and this goes hand in hand with level design. The game should appear striking, yet flow through the world is absolutely critical. Cyber Shadow is oozing in style with a gorgeous dark color palette that walks the line between 8 and 16-bit, but this design also serves the level design and hazard placement. Flood the screen with too many enemies, or not enough enemies, and the balance fails. You need to keep the action moving, but not to the point where the player feels overwhelmed. It just so happens that Cyber Shadow excels in each of these categories, and more. In fact, in many ways, Cyber Shadow feels like a spiritual successor to classic Natsume-developed NES games that I've long adored, such as Shatterhand or Shadow of the Ninja. Ultimately, it's a brilliant, responsive, and beautiful action game that delivers exactly what I want from this sort of title. I'm always encouraged by small developers who opt to focus not on pushing genre boundaries, rather to deliver the best darn game they can within genre norms. For me, it's all about that refinement, building on existing concepts, but making sure it's great. When you take all of these elements together, you have, in my opinion, one of the best 2D action games of the year, which is why it comes in at number 7. Forza Horizon makes a triumphant return to my Game of the Year list, this time with the latest entry, Forza Horizon 5. In my original video last month, I spent a good chunk of time extolling the virtues of the drive, that feeling of carving up the vast terrain in your vehicle of choice as the music and atmosphere wash over you. It's a wonderful place to be that perfectly captures the joy of driving through an exaggerated lens. And that's key. You see, Forza Horizon 5 is the only open world game on my Game of the Year list for 2021, and I think I've made it pretty clear that I'm not exactly a huge fan of modern open world tropes. The map full of icons with countless hours spent just holding up on the analog stick to cross usually beautiful yet often vapid worlds doesn't really appeal to me. The reason Forza Horizon works, though, lies in its ability to extract joy from the simple pleasures of driving. The traversal, in this case driving, is fun. There's this perfect ebb and flow to the action as you alternate between competing in events or simply reaching your destination. Everything is tied together by the choice of venue as well. Mexico turned out to be one of the best environments the series has explored to date. The variety in its terrain, combined with a newfound verticality and weather system, really enhanced the Horizon experience. It's perfect for this game. And ultimately, that's what it's about, the experience. Driving and completing races while speeding across the terrain as the music pours over you, that's the Forza Horizon experience, and this is just about the best it's ever been, thus why it comes in at number 6. I'll admit, It Takes Two initially flew under my radar. We didn't cover it on Digital Foundry, and while I did enjoy A Way Out, I never felt it was quite as enjoyable as the concept may have suggested. Yet, something compelled me to give this one a shot over the summer. It's a purely cooperative game, but it turns out I had the perfect co-op partner all along to enjoy it with, my son. The result, we had an absolute blast playing through the game, and he even came back to help me capture the footage for this video. Ultimately, It Takes Two is a cooperative platform game driven by a strong narrative of bringing a couple back together through cooperation. There's more to it than that, but over the course of the game you'll jump, run, and solve puzzles together, but it's the sheer variety that really keeps you going here. I was completely floored by the sheer volume of creativity on display. It feels like every section of each chapter has some fresh new idea ready for the player. And this leans heavily on the cooperative nature of the game. Most stages offer each player their own unique tool to play with. Early on, for instance, one character receives a hammer, while the other a retrievable nail. You'll use these to manipulate the environment, bypassing hazards in the process. You're ultimately platforming around here, but you need these tools to progress. In another scene, one player has the option to increase or decrease their size, while another can walk on walls and ceilings. There's so many ideas like this throughout the game, and each of these mechanics could almost stand as their own complete game. There's also the excellent boss battles and set-piece sequences, like the escape from the tree early on where one player pilots a plane while the other fires its cannons. But things turn on their head when the battle culminates in an epic fight with one player engaging a squirrel Street Fighter style, while the other pilots the plane through the brush. And then after this, the plane falls apart, forcing you to move your character's weight in tandem to reach the destination. It's just so absurdly creative and fun, I love it. It's also visually striking. Using Unreal Engine 4, the team has built a wonderful collection of realistic, real-world objects that are beautifully rendered and lit. It all moves at a brisk 60 frames per second too, at least on Xbox Series X where we played it. The point is, It Takes Two is one of the best cooperative experiences I've ever had in a game. It helps having a great gaming partner, of course, but the sometimes emotional storytelling, unbelievable amount of creativity, and surprisingly tight controls really elevate this one to the next level. It Takes Two is phenomenal and earns its spot as one of my favorite games of 2021. Way back at Gamescom 2018 in Germany, I remember talking to the folks at Housemarque about their latest announcement, Stormdivers, a battle royale game that never released and is likely cancelled at this point. This was after the studio posted the infamous Arcade is Dead blog, noting that they would be moving on to new genres due to poor sales of their more recent arcade-like experiences. So at this event, I remember clearly one of the guys mentioning something about the future of the studio depending on the success of their next games. Stormdivers, though, seemed like it was cashing in on the battle royale craze, so to speak, and I was a little worried it wouldn't hit. But they also teased another project, something that they'd been working on for a while that would be different and more ambitious than anything that had come before. That game is Returnable. Returnal is at its core a third-person action game with roguelike elements and a steep difficulty. The concept focuses on the main character Celine, who's trapped in a time loop of sorts, and upon death, wakes up in the ship just as it crashes on a mysterious planet all over again, resetting your progress, at least partially. The loop works surprisingly well though, with a delicate balance of many different elements designed to keep you engaged. Basically, each run through the game features randomly generated environments to a degree. There's a large selection of rooms and environments the game can shuffle and reshuffle, and you'll become familiar with those over time, but how they're connected is random. So too is the placement of items, weapons, and enemies. When combined with the horror themes, it creates this sense of uneasiness and mystery that is maintained throughout. What really surprised me though is how different each area of the planet actually feels. The opening ruins are dark, rainy, and claustrophobic, and by the time you finish this section, you have a pretty good handle on how the levels look and feel. Then you arrive in the desert. While it follows a similar flow, the size, scale, and atmosphere is so completely different. It's not just a new coat of paint here. The nature of the levels, the types of enemies you face, and how you engage with them varies drastically. Even after restarting so many times, I was still encountering unexpected enemies and bizarre new environments that really surprised me. It's engaging stuff that feels both compelling yet creepy. In addition, the actual challenge of the combat and the focus on learning and dodging attack patterns feels decidedly old school in a way that I love, very much in the style of Housemarque's own arcade-like heritage, but evolves into a larger 3D space. What's key to this experience really lies in how quickly you can fail though. Now this sounds frustrating on paper, and it's not going to appeal to everyone, but for me it lends the game a real sense of tension. This is enhanced by the initially obtuse nature of its systems. When you first begin, very little of the world and its systems actually makes sense, but the action is pick up and play enough that you kinda just keep going. Eventually, all of these concepts begin to fall into place, and you'll start to understand how to optimize your runs through the game. It's this mix of steep challenge, mysterious and engaging world design, and the fluidity of the central mechanics that really kept me coming back. Plus, everything moves at a brisk 60 frames per second and looks fantastic to boot. Returnal is perhaps the most engaging and rewarding game yet released for PlayStation 5, and is one you should absolutely check out if you think you're up to the challenge. Sometimes you get things wrong. When Guardians of the Galaxy was shown at E3 this year, I scoffed at the presentation. I enjoy Marvel flicks once in a while, but after the Avengers game, I didn't exactly have a lot of interest in Guardians of the Galaxy. I was also disappointed that Eidos Montreal was no longer building Deus Ex games. Turns out though, that Guardians of the Galaxy is not only good, it's one of the best experiences I've had all year. I was genuinely shocked by just how engaging this game turned out to be. So, gameplay wise, Guardians is kinda sorta a Mass Effect light style game. It's not really an RPG, though it has RPG elements, but it does send you and the Guardians around the galaxy as a team, engaging in combat, dialogue sequences, and puzzle solving, among other things. On the face of it, it doesn't seem like anything special, but once you dig in, it becomes clear just how well executed the game truly is. So firstly, there's the variety and creativity on display in its level designs. The worlds you visit are so strikingly beautiful to explore, with unusual color schemes, otherworldly shapes, and a massive sense of scale. Just visiting each planet on its own is a joy. It's not open world either, so there's no padding here. Every area feels carefully crafted. Within these environments then, you'll spend plenty of time engaged in combat. It's fairly simple stuff, but it's solid, mildly tactical, and fun. But it's the storyline and character performance that really elevates the game for me. I wasn't familiar with most of the talent behind the game's performances, but the portrayal of the characters and the quality of the writing is unusually great. I did not expect this at all going into it. In fact, the sheer volume of dialogue impresses even more. The characters talk constantly throughout the game, which could have been annoying, but it winds up feeling natural and enjoyable. It builds a stronger connection to the team. And that's what I think really sells the experience. Unlike a film, you spend dozens of hours with the characters in this game, and it really helps flesh them out. Some of these moments are heartfelt and serious, but there's plenty of lighthearted fooling around as well. I love scenes like this, for instance.
Welcome to Novacore headquarters.
Please state your preferred language of communication.
What are you doing, Starpants?
I agree with the rodent. Your language choice makes no strategic sense.
Groot says you should pick the top option. If you pick Creekwill, I'm gonna gnaw your ears off. Nuh-uh, not letting you do that, Quill.
Honestly, this was the biggest surprise of the year for me. I genuinely did not expect anything from this game, but I loved the experience so much that I plowed through it over the course of a couple weeks. That perfect combination of wonderful storytelling, solid action, and beautiful visuals just works. Honestly, even if you're feeling burnt out on Marvel as of late, do not sleep on this game. It's genuinely a wonderful experience from start to finish that I cannot recommend enough, which is why it comes in at number 3. I first played Metroid on the original Game Boy during the early 90s with Metroid 2 Return of Samus. It's not the best in the series, but I absolutely loved it. Yet decades later, when it received a remake for Nintendo 3DS, I was kinda left cold. It just never clicked with me. Which is why I felt some degree of trepidation when it was announced that Metroid Dread, a brand new entry in the Metroid series for Nintendo Switch, would be developed by the same developer, Mercury Steam. In addition, the Metroidvania genre had become crowded in recent years. Could this really live up to the expectations that come with a new Metroid? Well, minutes into my first playthrough of Metroid Dread, that cloud of concern began to lift. All of my issues with the Metroid 2 remake had been addressed, and what we're left with is a rock-solid, surprisingly challenging, and ultra-responsive side-scrolling Metroid game. This is the 2D Metroid game I've been wanting for years, and finally, it had arrived. Metroid Dread combines ultra-tight responsive controls with challenging battles and a vast map to explore. I really enjoyed how tightly focused the level design is. The game guides you along, but allows you just enough freedom to feel rewarding. I know some folks didn't enjoy the Emmy sections, but I really appreciate the contrast between the initial dangerous visit to these sections, followed by the newfound freedom you gain after eliminating the threat. The interesting thing here is that Dread tries to move the series forward both in terms of gameplay and narrative. While the game fundamentally revolves around 2D platforming action, the selection of tools and abilities you uncover over the course of the game feel remarkably fresh. The old trope of unlocking the morph ball right away, it's not here. Instead, you'll gain new abilities early on, such as the Spider Magnet or Phantom Cloak, before reaching those more familiar tools. There's a nice ramp up in terms of action as well. It starts simple enough, but by the end, the bosses you'll face push you to utilize your abilities to the fullest in a way that feels remarkably rewarding. The raw action in Dread is perhaps the best it's ever been in the series. The world is also complemented by a fantastic and robust map system, along with the perfect level of guidance. Metroid Dread is relatively focused, but it rarely points the way to your next objective directly. It basically allows the player to get stuck, which I think is a huge part of the Metroid experience, exploring and learning the map. In addition, Metroid Dread is one of the best looking games on Switch, with higher frame rates and a richly detailed environment, plus tons of stunning animation work. This is key in establishing its responsiveness. A blurry, less fluid experience would have absolutely compromised the gameplay. Honestly, from start to finish, I had an absolute blast with Metroid Dread. It feels like a proper return to form for 2D Metroid games, and something that stands out even in the crowded world of Metroidvanias, which is why it comes in at number 2. Before we get to my favorite game of the year, I want to first talk about my retro game of the year. What constitutes a retro game of the year? Well, basically, it has to be a game that released in the past that, until this year, I had never played. That's precisely the case with this year's pick, Ys 4: The Dawn of Ys. I'm a fan of the series, but somehow this PC Engine installment slipped under my radar until I picked up a copy this year. I played through the entirety of the game on an original PC Engine Duo system and walked away stunned by the experience. Ys 4 is effectively the final entry to lean on the classic bump combat formula. There's no attack button here, rather, you run into enemies, taking them out as you go. It sounds silly, but it's amazingly satisfying in practice, and Ys 4 pushes this forward by allowing 8-way movement. It's just more polished than it had ever been. The game offers this perfect blend of an engaging world, a simple but enjoyable narrative, great dungeon design, and memorable boss battles, all wrapped up in a phenomenal soundtrack. It's all very old school, but still engaging even in 2021. What really tips this over the edge though is its presentation. Throughout the game, you're treated to beautiful, full-screen pixel art sequences. For 1993, this is really impressive stuff, matching some of the best graphic adventure artwork found in PC games of the era. And of course, like I mentioned, the music plays a huge role in the presentation with a wide range of memorable, very 90s music tracks like this. Ultimately, Ys 4 really surprised me. I wasn't sure I could get back into bump combat again, but this might be my favorite of the classic entries now. I opted to play the original disc in Japanese, but there is actually a fan translation out there, so if you've never played it and fancy a little bump combat in your life, give it a look. Before we arrive at number 1, permit me to share a little story. Back in the summer of 1994, our family got a brand new Packard Bell Legend 20 CD personal computer. This was a turning point for me personally. Now, I loved console games, Sega and Nintendo, I played them all the time, but this was my first decent home computer capable of playing PC games such as Doom or Star Wars TIE Fighter, which I purchased alongside this new machine, by the way. Now, these games shipped on floppy disks, but what I really wanted was something on CD-ROM. It was the future, right? At least at the time. This thirst for the plastic platter of pleasure ultimately led to the purchase of a little game known as Day of the Tentacle from LucasArts. I knew Maniac Mansion, the prequel to Day of the Tentacle. We had a copy on our old IBM Personal System 2 Model 30. I loved that game, but it ran slowly and in CGA graphics mode. Day of the Tentacle though, this was a CD-ROM game, and based on the screenshots plastering the back of the box at least, it also kinda looked like a cartoon, plus it had full voice acting. I had to have it. Day of the Tentacle is the point in which LucasArts games really hooked me. I loved this game, and would wind up purchasing every single CD-ROM adventure game that would follow, including Sam & Max Hit the Road, Full Throttle, The Dig, and beyond. Over time, I started to remember the names of the people that had worked on these projects as well. Folks such as Dave Grossman, Sean Clark, Ron Gilbert, and Tim Schafer. By the turn of the century though, the point-and-click adventure game I had come to love was falling out of fashion, at least everywhere that wasn't Germany. My tastes had evolved as well, but I never forgot those wonderful years I spent clicking away within those magical worlds LucasArts had become known for. Which is why when it was revealed that Tim Schafer had left LucasArts to build a new studio, I paid attention. Their next game promised a mix of 3D platforming, which I'd grown to love during the second half of the 90s, and classic point-and-click adventure game concepts. Development wasn't smooth from what I understand, and they even lost their original publisher Microsoft before it was released in 2005 thanks to Majesco. That game was everything I had dreamt it could be and more. And thus, my game of the year for 2021 is the sequel to that game.
Three days ago, Truman Zanotto, the grand head of the Psychonauts, was kidnapped. Yesterday, with my help, the Psychonauts rescued Truman from the underwater lair of Dr. Lobato. But trust me, there's no way Lobato is working alone. Today, we're on a mission. Find out who hired Dr. Lobato to kidnap Truman Zanotto. My name is Raz, and today is my first official day on the job.
This is Psychonauts 2, a game which blends wildly creative 3D platforming action, surprising set-piece moments, and a rich, thoughtful exploration of the human psyche into a singular, cohesive package. Psychonauts 2 feels like the kind of game that is rarely made these days, but I'm so glad it was. A grab bag of crazy ideas shoved together into something that resonates deeply. Like the original, Psychonauts 2 focuses on the adventures of Rasputin Raz Aquato, as he both works to become part of the Psychonauts team, while also solving a deeper mystery that grows over the course of the story before culminating in reuniting the original founders of the Psychonauts in an attempt to save the world and their long-lost companion. Whew! The character performances, writing, and the places the game is willing to go with its storyline are all deeply engaging. There's plenty of comedy, of course, but the journey through this world is a powerful one that explores deep-seated fears, regrets, and urges buried deep within the mind of its cast. And even more than the original game, you'll spend plenty of time engaging with this cast using graphic adventure-like dialogue choices. But the key to Psychonauts lies in its variety. The sheer craft poured into each stage is honestly unbelievable. The introduction level impresses right away with its smart camera work and shifting perspectives. You can tell immediately that you're in for a ride. This is followed up with an exploration of your professor's mind as you attempt to convince her to allow you and the team to join the Psychonauts on an actual mission. But she has a troubled past involving research, which leads you through a series of stages that both explore her past and present. There's also a game show called Ram It Down, born out of one of the members' anxieties. You'll spend this stage participating in this wild exhibit to help restore his confidence. One of my favorites involves a brain that has been in storage since the 1960s, and your journey to bring life back to its dormant gray matter. What starts as a conversation with a ball of light, voiced by Jack Black no less, contrasted against an empty background, evolves as you help this ball of light discover his original personality and love of music as the Psy King. You regain his senses one at a time until everything culminates in a bombastic musical sequence.
Molecule through my cosmic eye.
This stage is a perfect representation of everything that makes Psychonauts 2 so unique and fun. Playing with themes, yet finding interesting gameplay within those themes. Essentially, each and every mind you explore is packed full of these unique ideas that work both on that narrative and game design level. Now, this was true of the original Psychonauts, of course, but the advance in technology here has allowed the developers to push things further. The size and complexity of the set pieces, the expert camera work and fluidity of everything is amped up to 11. Between these stages, you'll also explore Psychonauts HQ and the areas around it, much like an evolved version of the classic 3D hub world pioneered in games like Super Mario 64, so there's another classic connection for you. In this hub world though, this is where you'll encounter Raz's circus family, forcing him to reckon with his own past as well. Honestly, I just love everything about the game, and I can imagine this was a huge undertaking for the team. Implementing so many bespoke ideas and visual styles into a singular game like this, it's really unusual. Beyond that, it looks, sounds, and performs beautifully. I played on Xbox Series X using the 120Hz mode, which is simply sublime for platforming. It elevates the action by improving input response and overall fluidity. Plus, it feels like the off-kilter art direction the series is known for can finally stretch its legs due to advances in rendering technology. It's just a beautiful game to explore. Since its release last August though, I know a lot of people were asking, why didn't you cover this game on Digital Foundry? And at least from my perspective, the answer is quite simple. This is an experience to cherish, and one I wanted to enjoy on my own, free from the pressures of production, and I'm glad I did. Those warm August evenings I spent playing through Psychonauts 2 reminded me why I love video games in the first place. I was snapped back to those days sitting in front of that Packard Bell personal computer enjoying Day of the Tentacle. Psychonauts 2 took me to a place I wasn't sure I could go any longer, having become so deeply entrenched in examining the medium, but I found that magic in this game, which is why it's my very favorite game of 2021. So, that's it for 2021. What did you think of my picks? I mentioned earlier a theoretical number 9 and number 10, right? I'd have loved to include these in the video as well, but ran out of time. Capturing all these games again is a lot of time investment. But anyways, number 9 would have been Resident Evil Village, and number 10 would have been Halo Infinite. Both excellent games, I think. Definitely check them out. But that's gonna do it for this video. This is my final video of 2021. It's been a wild year, I think, but I look forward to what's coming with the next generation of games. But until then, we'll see you next time.